it's honestly heartless and cruel. And you're exactly right that Biden is going to say, oh my God, it's Clarence Thomas's fault, because he's the scapegoat. It's so funny how the one black guy on the Supreme Court, for every decision, not even the affirmative action decision, it's always Thomas's fault, whatever. So Uncle Thomas, that's what they're calling him now, the Democrats, because I guess it's a play on Uncle Tom, like he's a coon or a sellout or something, which I really hate. But good old Clarence Thomas is taking the fall for this. But Biden is going to run again on this and say, you need to elect me again so I can appoint more progressive SCOTUS judges. And that's what he's going to use, knowing good and dang freaking well that was never going to pass in the first place. They opened up those applications for millions of people knowing that it wasn't going to pass. Like, that is the definition of cruel and heartless and playing with people's emotions for political points.
Hey guys, and welcome back to Undoctrination. I'm Maggie.
And I'm Olivia.
And we have a doozy for you guys this week. Olivia and I became constitutional scholars over the weekend.
And we know better than everybody.
We will be critiquing the decisions made by the Supreme Court justices who we are clearly intellectually superior to, right, Olivia?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I'm actually Clarence Thomas's great grandniece. So, yeah. People would believe me too. Let me clarify, I am not, but people would believe me if I say that.
Honestly, yeah. People believe a lot of things on the internet.
People believed me when I said I was Spike Cohen's daughter for like several months.
Are you serious?
People actually believed me, so yeah.
Olivia, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, well, but if you look at a picture of me between him and Tasha, you'd believe it too.
Honestly, yeah.
You'd believe it too.
Yeah, they could be your parents for sure. So I just wanted to say that this past week, the reason we decided to do this podcast was because a bunch of amazing Supreme Court decisions came down the pipeline, huge wins for freedom and justice. And of course, the response has been incredible on social media, and social media tends to dictate what we want to talk about because we said earlier, there were a lot of newly minted constitutional scholars this past week online who felt they knew much better than 6 out of the 9 Supreme Court justices about constitutional law. And one of my biggest pet peeves this past week were all of the people who refused to look at the reasoning behind the decision making and instead just like continuing to examine all Supreme Court cases through the lens of identity and not through constitutional legitimacy. There are ways to do things in this country that are not unconstitutional, and yet the government continues to do things the wrong way, especially with the first big decision that came down the pipeline regarding student loan debt.
Yes, because I believe what they were doing was using the HEROES Act, I believe, as kind of a false precedent to give Joe Biden's administration the power to forgive, like, I think $430 billion or something, maybe upwards of $400 billion worth of student debt, which just straight off the bat would have been catastrophic for the economy. We're already in inflationary times. We're already in literally crazy, almost unprecedented times. I mean, we've had the highest inflation in like 41 years or something like that. And it's just adding on more federal government spending after we just went through the pandemic, after we just went through all these stimulus checks. It's a horrible idea. And then on the moral side of that, I think everybody listening to this podcast at least has some type of moral qualm with stealing money and redistributing it to people who made that commitment in the first place to pay those loans.
Right, exactly. And I did want to talk about this HEROES Act because, and not necessarily to get in the nitty gritty of what it is, but it was also used to suspend interest and loan payments during the pandemic. And one of the things I wanted to talk about with both the student loan debt court case and affirmative action is this idea that once you start handing things out to people or put a policy in place or promise people something, they believe that they will have that forever. So there's this huge uproar that people have to start paying their loans again and start paying interest on their loans again, when this was always the case. Like the suspension of these payments and the interest was the outlier situation. And I don't believe they should have even done that, to be honest. But I don't know. I just, like, I understand why you would be upset. And I'm going to be honest, Joe Biden, I think Joe Biden should be the person that people are upset with, and his secretary of the
He
DOE.
ran on this. Yeah. He ran on this knowing that it was unconstitutional. I don't believe for one second that the Biden administration actually thought that they could fall back on the HEROES Act for this. It needs congressional approval. It's so, I mean, it's just ridiculous to propose forgiving, and debt doesn't disappear, it just gets transferred. So when I say forgiving, I say that with a grain of salt, but you can't just cancel $430 billion without any type of oversight, without congressional approval, without the voters' approval. It's just insane to propose that. But unfortunately, Gen Z was duped by the Democrats once again. And, we're both in that around the same age range, where during the pandemic, a lot of our friends were graduating or still in school. And so now a lot of the people, because I was supposed to be a 2023 graduate. So most of my friends who are I grew up with, like, in high school and stuff, they just graduated. But ones that are a little bit older than me, they had graduated a couple of years ago, and they had enjoyed like 2 years of not paying student loans. And now they're like, what the heck do I do now?
Age group literally graduated the year that COVID was happening. And so they graduated into a situation where they never had to pay back on their student loans or pay interest. So the interest starts kicking in September, and people have to start paying in October. And a bunch of people are now going to be paying these exorbitant interest payments, loan payments. And I do feel very bad for them. I say that people should be pissed off at Joe Biden and Miguel Cardona, who was the Department of Education secretary, because they made this promise. And a bunch of people were actually approved. 16 million people were approved for this loan forgiveness program that was going to wipe out $10,000 to $20,000 of loans for people. And another 26 million applicants were waiting for their applications to be processed. So millions and millions of people made financial plans for the future, not counting in the fact that they would have to be paying off these loans again. That is absurd to me. And I do believe the Biden administration knew that they were going to get dinged for this and did it anyways for like political points, because it's a genius political strategy. Essentially, you say, hey guys, I'm going to forgive your loans. You give a bunch of handouts to young people. And so you fulfill a campaign promise, right? You make an attempt. The Supreme Court's going to shoot it down because you don't have the authority to make this loan forgiveness program happen. You should have gone through Congress. When the Supreme Court finally makes the decision that you knew they were going to make all along, you can just whine and complain and moan about how you tried really, really hard to forgive people's student loans. And those meanies on the Supreme Court, like, they're taking away our rights and they don't want your student loans to go away. Like, that's
an astute observation. That really actually should drive the point home for a lot of people, because you're exactly right. There are probably people who made a down payment on a house that they probably can't afford now that they have to pay for their student loans, and now that they're resuming. And it's ridiculous, and it's honestly heartless and cruel. And you're exactly right that Biden is going to say, oh my God, it's Clarence Thomas's fault, because he's the scapegoat. It's so funny how the one black guy on the Supreme Court, for every decision, not even an affirmative action decision, it's always Thomas's fault, whatever. So Uncle Thomas, that's what they're calling him now, the Democrats, because I guess it's a play on Uncle Tom, like he's a coon or a sellout or something, which I really hate. But good old Clarence Thomas is taking the fall for this. But Biden is going to run again on this and say, you need to elect me again so I can appoint more progressive SCOTUS judges. And that's what he's going to use, knowing good and dang freaking well that was never going to pass in the first place. They opened up those applications for millions of people knowing that it wasn't going to pass. Like, that is the definition of cruel and heartless and playing with people's emotions for political points. And then it actually is a genius strategy, because it actually is very smart, but it's horrible.
And I say Joe Biden is to blame. I don't think he knows what's going on. Like, it's the people behind Joe Biden. Like,
he's worried about what ice cream he's going to get today.
Obviously it's the people behind him that are pushing this political strategy. I honestly think that's why Joe Biden has been more progressive seeming than he would have been. And that's because his staff seems to be pushing like this really progressive agenda. That's just me, though.
I would just say at the time in 1971, when Clarence Thomas was accepted into Yale, it's a completely different ballgame to 2023, when there is no Jim Crow, when there is no legal segregation in higher education, except for affirmative action. So that's the only form of, I guess, like racial discrimination you could even make an argument for. So even if Thomas, let's say Thomas did get into Yale based off of affirmative action, not that he wasn't qualified, but that they had set a quota, like you have to admit this amount of black students, and he was one of the black students admitted. It's a completely different time now. It's a completely different time. And when we're in 2023 and there still are, like, I'm a big advocate for calling out racial disparities, I think, when it's an inconvenient fact or a convenient fact, because there are certain things that you can criticize, I think, about almost every community in this country. But the fact of the matter is, there is a racial generational wealth gap. You can trace it back to, I mean, like, for example, my grandparents weren't allowed to own a house in a certain part of town, go to a certain school. My grandfather was segregated in the United States Air Force, like crazy stuff like that. So I think there are lasting effects to that. But in the current day and age, what is stopping me from getting my books, hitting the books, and applying to college? I don't think there is anything stopping me. And it's interesting because I feel like I have a personal experience with it, because I was in the magnet program in public schools, Montgomery County public schools, for middle school and high school. And for middle school, I was in a majority black school, but the magnet program was majority white and Asian. And I was like one of like a handful of black kids in the magnet program. So you could see.
I remember the magnet program. It was a similar situation with all of the schools that I went to outside of private schools. Just because.
But you could see the difference, and there was no quota, because obviously if there was, there would be a lot more black kids in the magnet program at a majority black school. And it's just like, I never felt like I was held back by my race in that regard, you know?
Yeah. I also think, okay, so just going over the affirmative action case super quickly, can you give us the details of what exactly was decided on?
Yes, sorry, I was rambling a little bit. So the actual case is the Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard. So Students for Fair Admissions is this group who is really against diversity, equity, inclusion, affirmative action, of course, and basically all these like forced racial groups in higher education. So SCOTUS decided last Thursday that race-based affirmative action in college admissions is in violation of the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. That makes sense to me. If you know the 14th Amendment, if you know how equal protection works, you should, I mean, it actually is crazy how affirmative action has lasted this long, because if you actually just read the clause, it's like, okay, this racial discrimination, race-based affirmative action should not be a thing at the federal level, you know? And so in terms of the reception, there was an ABC News poll or survey, I believe, that found that 52% of Americans agree with the decision and 32% disapprove of it, which I find interesting, because I feel like the 32% are very, very loud right now, and they're coming after Clarence Thomas again, of course. But Thomas actually made some key points that you may not even expect him to have made, because, I mean, coming out of a black man's mouth, to them, it's very controversial, and they're accusing him of pulling the ladder up behind him. But like I said before, 1971 and 2023, very different times. But
So what did he say?
So I skimmed the 237-page court decision, like the whole document. And in it, he uses the argument that the use of race in admissions leads to, quote unquote, inevitable underperformance by Black and Latino students at elite universities, quote, because they are less academically prepared than the white and Asian students with whom they must compete. And so he's basically using the argument that, okay, if you're not choosing students based off of merit, then they will inevitably fail because they're not actually prepared. You're actually doing these people a disservice
Yeah.
when admitting them into these schools. And it actually, in the paper, the court documents, they actually brought up facts about how Black and Latino students are a little bit more likely to drop out or fail out of these Ivy Leagues in higher institutions that have affirmative action in place, because there is a portion, not all Black and Latino students, obviously, because there's obviously a lot of smart Black people and Latino people of every race and every color, but the portion that are admitted based off of their race and not their merit, they tend to drop out. And
because they're in competition with a bunch of people that are more academically prepared than they are.
And that's not racist or offensive to say. I mean, that they're not saying that Black people can't get into these schools. They're saying that we should have to get in based off of our merit, our grades, our extracurriculars, and I agree with that. He also said, quote, Thomas also equates affirmative action in higher education with segregation, arguing that racial preferences in college admissions, quote, stamp Black and Latino students with a badge of inferiority. So I think this goes back to the whole Democrat strategy of racism by low expectations. Like, there's no way we could possibly lift ourselves up by our bootstraps. There's no way we could possibly do anything in life without the white savior giving us a hand up. And I reject that notion entirely.
Yeah, and I also think it's just unfair, especially to Asian students, because I know that they tend to be the demographic that's actually impacted the most by affirmative action policies. So essentially, they're less likely to be admitted even with all of the grades and all of the extracurriculars, just because only a certain percentage of their race is allowed in. And they tend to exceed more academically. And I don't really know why that's the case. Maybe it's just like a cultural thing with parents, but
I think it's partially cultural. And also, if you look at, so the original purpose of affirmative action, obviously was to kind of recorrect and right some of the wrongs that America did, mostly to Black people, mostly to American descendants of slavery. Obviously, like, Latinos and other minorities are included in that, but that was the original purpose. To this day, the biggest beneficiaries of affirmative action are actually white women, because sex is a protected class. And white women are like the most educated, higher educated group in America. Now that the race...
Aren't the majority of people in college women? Like, isn't that what the majority of higher education is?
Yes, which is kind of crazy, but that's basically the reason, is that women are a little bit more likely to be accepted than men in general. But now that the race part is out of it, I think white women are going to even soar further, because it's just like the sex-based affirmative action that I believe that is still legal. But back to my point, this was for American descendants of slavery. It clearly did not end up turning out that way. And even the majority, I believe it's over half of Black students admitted into Ivy Leagues now are not even American, or they're actual African Americans. Like, they're from Africa, they're international students, or their parents are African and immigrated here. And a lot of Black African groups actually come here and do better than Black American groups. Like, Nigerian Americans do better than white Americans.
It's the immigrant mentality. Like, if you're going to uproot your entire life and your whole family to move to a new country, like, you are going to make sure that your kids succeed. Like, I really think that's why immigrant groups tend to succeed more academically.
They're sending their best.
There's like a pressure at home to, you know, like,
you will literally bring
perform.
shame to your family if you don't. So there is that. There is that. And just to illustrate the difference between the acceptances of Black and Asian students, in the court documents, they compared it with the Harvard acceptance rates. And it was like almost 40 or 50% of Black and Latino students accepted that race was a contributing factor. Not the whole sole factor, but a contributing factor.
For 40%?
Of Black and Latino students, which I think is setting people up for failure. And so for all things being equal, in the top percentile of applicants, Black students in the top percentile of applicants, about 50% were accepted. Asian students in the top percentile of applicants, only about 12% were accepted. So all things being equal, all grades and extracurriculars essentially being equal, Black students are still about 4 times more likely to get into Harvard.
Yeah.
So I do find that unfair, and especially when the majority, and especially when these Black students, they're immigrants just like the Asian students. They really are coming from, more or less equal standing. Usually first or second generation immigrants usually come from like a similar, I think like the Nigerian, you're going to become like a doctor, professor, lawyer. Same. It's very similar to like East Asian culture. And it's just, affirmative action was totally bastardized from what it was supposed to be for. And it's over.
I have a question, and you may not have an answer to this. So
I have answers for everything, Maggie.
Yeah, I know that at Ivy League schools, there is a huge, legacy admission type of process happening. So, like, if your parents went there, you get in almost always, from what I understand. So if the majority of previous graduates from Harvard were white and a lot of their children and grandchildren apply and get in, does that mean that affirmative action, because there's like a cap, would that disadvantage like poorer or middle class white students who were trying to apply to Harvard? Because I feel like with these caps, like it actually is just creating the system that puts certain groups who are already at a disadvantage at even more of a disadvantage when it comes to getting in.
Right. So the legacy thing is a tricky subject for me, because if you boil it down, companies, businesses, which include education institutions, they're allowed to take referrals and accept people based on referrals. And a legacy student is basically referred to the school by their family. That's how I look at it. Okay, your grandparents, your parents went here, they contributed to this school, you're probably good to let in. So on a free market basis, that actually works fine. Of course,
no problem with it. It's the fact that then there is this like cap on the percentage of the student body that can be this race. And if so much of that percentage is taken up by legacy admissions, then what happens to people coming from low income backgrounds? Like, from my understanding, affirmative action is actually impacting a lot of lower income students because of processes like that.
Of course. So there, I think at the end of the day, it's hard because I don't feel very strongly about legacy, but I'll tell you why. Because at the end of the day, life is going to be unfair either way. People with money and people who come from generational wealth will have a higher standing than you and will start off in a better place than you. Like my parents did not come from money. I did not come from money, but you kind of do what you can with that. And I also think, honestly, as an outsider, as somebody who did not apply to an Ivy League, so don't call me a hater because you just got kicked out or you just got denied. No, I didn't care about going to Ivy League. But as an outsider looking in, I think we give these institutions a little bit too much credit and a little bit too much power, and you don't need to go to one, and you don't need to pay exorbitant fees or be accepted into one to succeed in life at all.
It's the networking. It's like the name.
Yeah.
I've been thinking.
That's what social media is for now. I mean, if I went to Harvard and totally never went on the path of social media and Twitter, I would never have congressmen knowing my name. I would never have been invited on TV and had that reach. I would have never had this podcast. And obviously this is, I would say, an exceptional circumstance, but there's always things you can do, especially with the advent of technology and the reach that social media has and the research that you can do at home in the library or on the internet. I mean, there's endless knowledge out there. There's endless opportunities out there. And I drive that point home for a lot of people listening, because a lot of people listening are probably panicked, like, oh my God, I have to start paying my student debt. I may not have actually finished my degree, or I can't get into Harvard, or da-da-da-da-da. A lot of stuff is wrong with higher institutions and higher education these days. And I will just say to you, it's not the end of the world, and you don't need it. And for certain jobs, if you have a dream job, I want to be a lawyer. Yeah, go to law school.
Yeah.
You don't have to go to Harvard Law, but go to law school and you'll be fine. Okay. I'm an optimist.
And you can always go back to college. I don't know. It's complicated, but I think you're absolutely right. Like, you don't need to get into an Ivy League to succeed in life. But Ivy Leagues, it's weird. Like, you totally get set up for success when you go to an Ivy League. Because that name, like, companies want that name in their portfolio of employees.
Of course. But that's how the money works in this country. If you come from a rich family, you're going to do rich family stuff. The fact that Harvard understands that money talks is not like some crazy white supremacist plot. That's just how it is. And it is unfortunate that in this country, because of racial discrimination, there is a disproportionate amount of white to black families that have way more generational wealth than, and in turn are not legacy, or black families have less of a legacy at Ivy Leagues. I think that's only a thing that can be helped over time. I don't think it's something that you can force, especially when you're not even being specific to families of Black American descent and you're giving out the admissions and scholarships to immigrants from all over the world who we don't really owe anything, who we did nothing wrong to, So the whole thing was counterintuitive and counterproductive. And I think it led to more racial division in this country because now we're having this whole debate over, can Black people even get here on the merits of our own?
And the answer is yes, they can,
The answer is yes, we can. But it's just like, you guys put this inferiority complex on us, and now we're having this whole debate of, are we even supposed to be here? But I want to talk about one more reaction before we move on to the next and last major Supreme Court decision. So Trump had an interesting reaction because you may find this one actually typical, but it's interesting with the context. So immediately after the decision to overturn affirmative action in schools, he said, "This is a great day for America. People with extraordinary ability and everything else necessary for success, including future greatness for our country, are finally being rewarded. This is the ruling everyone was waiting and hoping for." But what's interesting is that in 2015, when Trump was actually running for president, he said, "I'm fine with affirmative action. We've lived with it for a long time, and I've lived with it for a long time, and I've had great relationships with lots of people. So I'm fine with it."
Dude,
so
he's just saying stuff.
He was fine with affirmative action when he ran for president, and now he is not fine with it. So I just find that interesting.
That's really funny.
I like to do my bad president impressions. Oh, I made some guy laugh at the bar so freaking hard last night because I did a really good Bernie Sanders impression, but I'll save that for later.
Oh, man, I need to hear that.
We have to get rid of the billionaires. But yeah, I just kept saying that over and over.
That's just a sneak peek, you guys.
That's just a sneak peek. You guys need to go on my YouTube and watch my Kamala impressions. That's what you got to watch.
Yeah, the next Indoctrination episode should just be you doing impressions of different politicians.
And they're all bad.
Me wheezing in the background.
I'm going to learn how to do a Maggie impersonation.
Oh, God.
Sometimes that Baton Rouge accent comes out.
I know. It's very embarrassing.
You'll be like, "What's going on?" Like all this, you're like,
I was trying to describe Louisiana rap the other day, and I realized that all rap from Baton Rouge really just exaggerates the vowels, especially the O. Like if you listen to Kevin Gates, he's just got he's got a lot of rounded vowels.
That's how you talk. And it's funny because you don't look like you talk like that, but you do. Like when I've seen you like just a little bit excited or emotional, you talk like freaking Kevin Gates. But yeah, let's move on. Let's move on.
No.
Do you want to introduce the next and last key case here?
This is a pretty simple, cut and dry case. I personally thought we had already figured this one out.
Me too. I was like, keeps getting in the news
again.
And it's always Colorado too.
Like, what's going on? Okay, so there's this lady. Her name is Lori Smith, and she runs this business called 303 Creative in California. And she's a graphic designer and Colorado. She's a graphic designer and a web designer, and she wanted to start doing web designs for couples that were going to get married, right? But Lori Smith is a Christian, and it goes against her religious beliefs to design websites for same-sex couples. And now, before we get into this discussion, I do not think this makes Lori Smith bigoted. I just think she doesn't want to participate in something she does not believe is, a real marriage according to her religious beliefs. That doesn't mean that she hates gay people. Okay.
She didn't go to their wedding and protest. These people sought out her services.
Yes. Okay. And it's against her religious beliefs to participate. If you had a sincerely held religious and or moral belief, and it went against that to participate in something, you would be well within your right to not do it.
Like,
I
what's
don't
wrong
understand
with
why
that?
we're compelling behavior from
it's
people.
always Colorado. It was like the Colorado wedding cake baker, the one that wanted like a trans coming out cake.
Yeah.
It's like, why are you guys harassing Colorado Christians?
Girl,
This is weird.
No, it's because Colorado is just like the rest of the West. You either have like stoner hippie liberal types, or you have like granola religious people. You know, like it's either or.
It's just funny because they don't try this crap with Muslims. They never say, "Can I get married in your mosque?" They never say, "Can I go to the halal bakery and get some rainbow cupcakes for my coming out party?" They never do that crap.
Yeah,
they never
you wouldn't
do
go
it.
into a kosher restaurant and ask them to make something with meat and cheese in the same dish. I'm sorry, you just wouldn't.
Like you would. What is so hard about respecting
not in your right
people's
mind
belief?
say to do that? Okay. Anyways, the judges ruled 6-3, like they've been doing pretty much consistently, that the First Amendment trumped the law in Colorado that led to people trying to sue her. The law in Colorado basically made same-sex couples like a protected class. So, like, you can't discriminate against someone based on their sexuality. However, the First Amendment does trump state law. Sorry, babes. Yes,
sorry.
It is her First Amendment right.
Sorry.
Religious freedom. Period. End of story. But we got like the usual response from everyone, like, oh, we're going backwards.
They're coming for black people next. They're always like, they're coming for interracial marriage next. That's what they say to scare people. And that's what they say to Clarence Thomas, too, because he's in an interracial marriage. I believe his wife is a Caucasian woman. And they're like, they're coming for you next, Uncle Thomas. Like, what do you think this is?
People just hear the word gay and they're like, okay, like, we're being oppressed. It's like, no, you just can't force someone to do something for you.
And why would you want to pay somebody who doesn't approve of your marriage to make a wedding website?
I don't know. And I don't know Lori Smith, but I can't guarantee she's a bigot, but I'm sure y'all aren't happy with the fact that she doesn't want to support you. So why would you give your money to her?
She may be a bigot now after all of this, because if somebody is taking me to the Supreme Court to force me to make a website for them, I actually might hate their guts after that. But that's just me.
And honestly, she might have just been like trying to counteract the state law because she wanted to start doing wedding web designs. But either way, you know, a lot of people were also talking about how, like now we won't serve Christians because, you know, if y'all can discriminate, we can too. Okay, do it. Christians will be pissed off just in the same way you're pissed off, and that will probably be a bad decision for you, just in the same way it's probably a bad business decision for them. It's a free country. I don't understand why we want to force people to do things that they don't want to do.
Because they're narcissistic, entitled pieces of poo. And it's so interesting because would you ever see a Christian couple, like not even a gay couple, just a Christian couple, go to a Muslim wedding business, like say like, hey, we want to use your venue. We want to get married by your imam. We want to get married with your halal food. They would have every right to say no. And that is A-okay. We should respect people's religious beliefs. And by the way, I mean, I'm sure everyone listening kind of gets the gist at this point. But just to clarify, we're pro-gay marriage. This has nothing to do with the morality of it. This is everything to do with the freedom of association and free speech.
Right. I like on the state level, because marriage is no longer just like a religious sacrament. It is now a practice on the state level that brings you new privileges. I think it's fine. Like, I don't think there's any reason to keep it away. But based on a religious level, you can't force a religion to conform the way you want them to. That's just how the world works.
Look at the origins of marriage. I mean, it started off as a religious ceremony that now is enjoyed by everybody of any religion, of every, or even non-belief or whatever. And you know, I'm of the opinion, get government out of it. Why do I need tax breaks? Why do I need privileges? Why don't you just start us off with less taxes? How about them apples? How about that? How about them apples? But like, yeah, get it out of marriage. But since the government is in marriage, then I don't think the government has a right to deny to consenting adults that privilege. But that doesn't speak that you can't speak for everybody else. You can't force everybody to like you. There are people still to this day in this country who would disagree with interracial marriage. Not saying they have any really political power.
All on Twitter.
They're all on Twitter.
Speaking their mind every single day.
Yeah. But you know what that doesn't do? It doesn't affect me not one bit, because I still exist. I'm still here, interracially made, and am I going to just start fading into the mist if they say we don't like interracial marriage? Like, that's fine. I'm not going to pay you to make my interracial wedding website if you don't like it. I don't want to give you my money if you're racist. I don't want to give you my money if you're a homophobe. And not even saying religious people are homophobes, but just saying if I perceive you to be bigoted against me, I'm not taking you to court to force you to service me and force you to take my money. I mean, I might leave you a Google review. I don't know. Like, that's about it.
Also, we saw that boycotts are finally working again. I don't think they ever stopped working, but at this point, like, boycotts are working. So, you know, if you disagree with the way a business is doing things, just stop giving them your money.
Question mark, just stop? Yeah, I mean, but that's too, I mean, Maggie, that's too simple of an answer to these people, because like I said, they're completely narcissistic and self-centered, and they feel like the whole world should just revolve around them. Everybody, no matter what culture, no matter what religion, no matter what background you're from, they all have to love you. They all have to support your gay marriage. You just have to be celebrated and affirmed. Like, I think I've talked about this before in a couple episodes ago, but we're in the age of affirmation. We have to affirm everybody's choices. We have to approve and celebrate and accept everything about everyone. We have to destigmatize everything, and everything is positive and liberated and and you're a bigot if you have anything to say about it.
Definitely. I think we might be experiencing the backlash to the age of affirmation, in which the pendulum swings like the other way, super hardcore. It's like the age of like people like reprimanding you for every choice you make. Like, I definitely see that as well. I think both are really toxic. I think social media has warped our brains, where now we're like seeking the approval and relying on the entire world to agree with us and support us, when really, again, as I say, we should just be building communities that support us and uplift us. You know, it's kind of the gist of it.
That is a great point. And I think that the overarching theme that we can fit loosely on all three of these major key Supreme Court decisions over the last week is freedom, I think, won, and fairness won. And I think that those wins are few and far between in this country and this Biden administration. So I think that's cause for a celebration. And I feel like I'm a little bit more upbeat and cheery on this episode, because I'm like, okay, things are going in the right direction. They'll probably swing back the other way next week, and there's going to be another Supreme Court case out of Colorado about some trans coming out party that they didn't want to hold at the Catholic Church or something like that, and they're going to sue them. And then we'll talk about that too.
Dude. Yeah, more like the supremely based court. Oh.
Hey!
Anyways, we'll see you guys next week. Maybe. Are we coming back next week? Is Freedom Fest next week? What's going on?
Freedom Fest? Oh my God, guys, I'm going to be speaking at Freedom Fest, by the way.
Yeah, go see Olivia, you guys.
In Memphis, I'm speaking on a panel. It's about consent culture. So that basically includes, like, obviously the consent in the way that we think about it commonly in terms of relationships, but also consent in the lens of freedom. Like, I do not consent to you taking this property. I do not consent to you forcing this ideology upon me. So we're going to talk about all that. It's going to be cool. Kennedy's going to be there. I believe Afro Man is going to be there. There's going to be a lot of celebrities and a lot of really interesting people. Yeah.
Oh,
and there's going to be a lot of really cool freaking people there. So yeah, go check that out. And I think we will be shooting next week.
Awesome. And where can we find you, Olivia?
You guys can follow me on Twitter at Rondeau Olivia and Instagram at Rondeau.Olivia.
Awesome. And you guys can follow me Twitter at Liberty Anders. And as always, make sure to like, subscribe, leave us a comment, tell us about your day. And we hope you have an amazing week. Bye.
Bye.